So there used to be a documentary that was available for free online. It was a 2020 kind of expose about Jim and Tammy Bakker and PTL and Heritage USA. If you've never heard of those, what they are is um, Jim Bakker had been an Assemblies of God minister. The Assemblies of God had its roots in the whole Pentecostal movement at Azusa Street. It was a very holiness oriented movement. Um, I grew up in the Assemblies of God, and when I was young, um, like my grandparents, my great grandfather was a pastor, and in his generation, I mean, when I say holiness, the type of thing I mean is people didn't uh, watch TV, they didn't go fishing or go to ball games on Sundays. Um, Women didn't wear pants; they only wore dresses. Didn't tend to wear makeup or a lot of jewelry. Um, there was, an aversion. There was no kind of drinking or smoking, um, nothing like that. And even later generations, when I was a kid, if middle school, if the youth group did something, an event that involved swimming, the guys and the girls would never swim together. If there was a pool, they would take turns. If it was at the beach, they would be at different points in the beach with different, guy leaders with the guys, lady leaders with the girls. It was very, much more strict. Things that a lot of people in that movement may have thought that's weird. That you didn't go to dances. Um, you just there were um, some kind of standards, some ideas of this is what it means to be holy, and you didn't want to be worldly. And the Assemblies of God was birthed in that type of movement. Um, and Jim Bakker and Tammy Faye were from that background, but they kind of came to prominence in a period when that church was going through a sort of shift, and there was a kind of evangelical shift going on as well, which they were related to and a part of in some ways. Um, and there had been movements to take the gospel on to see television as a tool, broadcast as a tool for sharing the gospel. But originally, that was pretty much like, maybe some dramatic presentations of like Christian stories or preachers on TV or prayer lines on TV. And sometimes those preachers would, raise money on TV for the sake of keeping their show on the air because it was expensive to do. Um, what you see happen with Jimmy Swaggart, Jimmy Swaggart kept the persona of the holiness movement, which you're watching a some interview and stuff on Jimmy Swaggart as well as Jim Bakker. But Jimmy Swaggart kept that kind of holiness persona, though he had his own issues within certain members of the holiness movement. His cousin was actually Jerry Lee Lewis, the kind of rock and roll pianist, piano player. The kind of Great Balls of Fire piano. And Jimmy Swaggart had a little bit of that kind of style in his piano playing. So there was a little bit of criticism from certain segments of holiness movements. Nonetheless, his preaching kind of won him acclaim as being kind of on board with the traditional holiness. But he kind of succumbed to this empire building where this TV ministry started appealing for money, so that the ministry rakes in really more and more money, and it becomes kind of an empire. The difference with Jim Bakker is he really crossed a lot of lines because he blurred a lot of lines. The PTL network and Jim Bakker and Jimmy Swaggart didn't. They were on very different pages with regard to each other. They weren't they weren't fans of each other. But Jim Bakker, Jim and Tammy Faye they ran the PTL show. Instead of just having a preacher up on stage preaching, with the kind of the broadcasting being just a way to kind of bring people to the sermon, um, they created this sort of whole atmosphere of a show. Uh, think of almost like an evangelical Christianized Regis and Kathy Lee type morning show atmosphere. Famous people who happen to be Christians come in to be interviewed, writers of books, uh, big name preachers, musicians who happen to be Christians, or Christian musicians who gospel musicians, contemporary Christian music musicians would come in for interviews and to sing a song. Had that morning show feel. They dressed very stylishly for the times, very comfortably, uh, very kind of low key, approachable appearance is what they were going for. And from that, they kind of grew this empire where they developed this Christian vacation spot, Heritage USA, um, that was kind of you know, a mini Disney area. They didn't have the roller coasters, but it had like a water park and a little train-looking tram that went around the grounds, and you could buy um, kind of timeshares. And where the real problem came in is they didn't make a distinction between this kind of vacation business side of things and this kind of broadcast empire and ministry. And so they're pitching everything as nonprofit, and they're doing telethons to raise contributions from people. But then they're also running this business under the same nonprofit, selling, um, selling spots in timeshare condos on their Heritage USA vacation spot, where you could go and get into the water park and have this Main Street USA kind of fancy indoor shopping area, um, and these castle-looking buildings where they had outdoor stages, amphitheaters where they would do dramatic productions, um, and they kind of created this I don't know, American dream couple, nice Christian people persona. And I don't mean that it sounds like they intended it to be fake, but um, with that much money, and eventually there becomes in corruption, and then conflict in their marriage, and cheating, and um, all kinds of stuff. I'm sharing all this because this is kind of the realities going into the interview that you're going to watch. Um, the documentary, the 2020 documentary on it that used to be available for free online, is no longer there. It went through all of this in much greater detail. I'm just kind of giving you the 10-minute version. So you have some concept of kind of what this interview is about. So this interview you're going to watch is with Jim and Tammy after they've been kind of caught in their marriage breakdown and affairs, and they're being investigated for fraud. With the Heritage USA, they had oversold. Um, in order to build more condos, they sold more space than they actually had, on the assumption that um, people wouldn't look too deeply and people wouldn't question too far if they tried to call in and reserve, and space wasn't available um, at the times that people wanted. But it's right up in Rock Hill. You can actually go there. There's still the remains of Heritage USA. It's kind of some of it's been repurposed and has been renovated by a different ministry. Some of it is just run down completely. But right here, in Rock Hill, South Carolina. So it's that empire really collapsed around their fraud, um, around because they're appealing online. They're appealing, sorry, not online. They're appealing on camera, on TV, to a bunch of people out there to send them money, tax deductible, support their ministry, but then it's going into paying big salaries, it's going into big investments, it's going into developing a vacation center. And they really blurred all these lines between, ministry and business, and that caused problems. The affairs were kind of secondary. They came out of all that. The fraud and the corruption led to the stress, I think, that led to the affairs, and the affairs are really what got them caught first. And then all the financial fraud started coming out along with that. So that's the interview that you're going to watch, is kind of several weeks, a few months maybe after everything has broken, and then the news is out, and they're trying to give their side of the story. And the way they appear in this interview is very much like they were in their TV show. That's the persona they tried to give. And it was pretty popular for a while. But it really blends with this idea of prosperity preaching. What I mean by that. So the holiness movement that the Pentecostals were a part of, separation from worldliness really mattered. So there's almost a putting on a pedestal poverty, or at least a simplicity, kind of the ancient Christian values of simplicity and poverty, and not pursuing wealth and not being worldly. That had been the foundings of the Pentecostal movement and the Assemblies of God that Jim and Tammy came out of. But Jim and Tammy Bakker's idea was, well, this should be, you should be able to have a normal life and be a Christian too. And wealth isn't bad, and comfort's a good thing, and we want to give people a nice, friendly, family-friendly place to vacation, and we want, entertainment's not a bad thing. And so they really tried to look like the culture around, but maintain a certain aspect of kind of Christian morality and ideas.